Imagine being scared to go to the doctors, wondering if this is the day that you walk in with a sinus infection and they ask to see your genitals.
Imagine going to your family reunion and no one caring enough to learn your chosen name, so you sit there and wonder, will they ever respect my identity?
Think about your darkest time in your life and needing to speak to a mental health professional, but they are anywhere from 2 to 3 hours away and you aren't even sure if they can help someone on the gender spectrum.
We can be openly discriminated against, asked to leave stores, restaurants, and even denied health care under Trump's administration.
Every day is life or death for us.
Now at noon, a new proposal by the White House that could threaten how transgender people get health care.
How can we live in a country safely when we're being erased by the government?
I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens.
Well, that was then and this is now. The New York Times reporting the Trump administration wants to legally define transgender out of existence by officially recognizing only a person's gender at birth.
How do we work on our depression, anxiety, and mental illnesses when we can't find a healthcare professional who can treat and care for us properly?
More than 51% of trans Southerners and 58.9% of non-binary Southerners have attempted suicide. This is more than double for cisgendered Southerners. But no one sees the struggles that we face in the South.
No one knows the terror of seeking help.
We're looking at it. We have a lot of different concepts right now. They have a lot of different things happening with respect to transgender right now. You know that as well as I do, and we're looking at it very seriously. I'm protecting everybody. You know what I'm doing? I'm protecting everybody.
This series will shed light on censorship, accessibility, queer sex, inadequate mental health care, being banned from doctor's office waiting rooms, being disowned by family, mental health struggles including suicide attempts, and the inability to change birth certificates.
This is the reality we face being trans in the South.
Working on that trauma, working on that PTSD brought me back into my body, which then I discovered was the wrong one.
Pronouns they, them, theirs. Occupation is assistant professor of history at Roanoke College. Identify as non-binary and trans feminine. I identify as a femme also. Yeah. It's called the Southwest Virginia LGBTQ plus History Project, and we started in 2015. And our first meeting was at the local community center, the LGBT community center, which is called the Roanoke Diversity Center. We had 18 people come out in the evening. It was like my first month here on the job, and basically advertised it. I talked with the Diversity Center folks about this and just advertised it as like, there's this new like queer professor in town who's interested in LGBT history, like come out and have a conversation. And we had a 2-hour workshop that I led. That was basically asking folks, what do you want to know? You know, what can I help you with? Like, I'm a historian and I have these skills. What can I help with that the community wants in terms of LGBT history and historical consciousness. And out of that meeting, there were 2 mandates came out of that meeting. I mean, first of all, the mandate that like a name for the project came out, and the idea that we should have a project, and that's the one that's in its 5th year now. But also that people at that meeting said they want to do oral histories with the elders and capture their stories, which I know how to do. So I've been training young people to do those since, and we've done about 40 hour-long interviews that are online and are archived with the local library. And to create an archive, which we've also done with the local public library, so people can give their old flyers and newsletters. And I didn't know what existed here in Roanoke. I moved here from New York City. You've got to keep in mind, I'm a New Yorker. And I moved down here, and I certainly had views about Appalachia that are based in stereotypes, as people do. And I thought, okay, we'll see what we find in this archival drive. And we very quickly got newsletters from 1971, within 2 years of Stonewall. They were produced here in Roanoke, a group in Roanoke that had formed for gay liberation and was making their own newsletter and doing actions and so on. And now we have about 4 archival boxes full of a lot of newsletters from 71 to close to the present. I don't think we have a print paper right now. There was a lesbian newspaper published here in the 80s that we have a full run of. There was one particular gay paper published here that went on for 25 years or so, which is pretty long running for a gay publication. So we have all of these. We've been for years scanning every single page and digitizing. There's like an army of students. Right now there's a local high school student who's doing a lot of that work for us. So that's, pretty amazing stuff. And then we do monthly walking tours, free walking tours we have a downtown tour which stops at sites of historic gay bars and sex work sites and cruising sites. We have an Old Southwest tour, that's the neighborhood, so the gay neighborhood that I live in and has historically been a gay neighborhood in Roanoke. We do a tour there, and we're about to launch a new tour, which is in the west part of downtown, which is focused a bit more on some AIDS history, AIDS services, more sex work, and criminal justice issues like policing, and gentrification, which we're sort of taking head on in this new tour as gentrification as a process of erasing queer and trans people from space. So we do that. We've made some small exhibits. We've done youth programs. We have this interactive theater program that we've done for 3 years with local LGBT youth at a LGBT summer camp that's actually here in the mountains, that builds on oral histories and archives. And we have the youth use those materials and create skits about trans history, about lesbian history. So we're constantly doing stuff like that. We have the next big event coming up is for World AIDS Day on the December 1st. We're partnering with the local Planned Parenthood for an evening event in a historic Black theater in Roanoke that's centering kind of Black HIV experiences and uses some oral histories we've done. So it's like we're constantly working to try to empower LGBT people to be storytellers and to feel a sense of historicity, as we say, the presence of queer history and trans history here, that it's like part of what makes our city tick, and that's a big part of what I do off campus. I feel like the full me is here, the real me living my best life is here, and like I go up to New York, which you'd think would be like, okay, I'm like really gonna be me now. But in New York, it's like I feel kind of closeted in a sense, because my gender is like Roanoke, my sexuality is Roanoke. Like it's like it's come into full being in this space and feels really entwined with this space.
I think community is a group of people with whom you can be authentic. I think we often think as community as people with shared identity, so that could be people who have similar jobs, similar location, class, race, gender identity, all those things. But that doesn't necessarily equate to safety and space where you can really feel like you can grow as a person.
As we drove through the city of Roanoke, we saw that part of the town with a lot of minorities was consumed with abandoned buildings, abandoned homes, out-of-date gas stations, but very industrialized with big metal buildings. As we traveled to meet Jacye, we also drove through a predominantly white area with big homes, nicer stores, and what looked like a better opportunity for a good life. Then we quickly found ourselves in the middle of the country, surrounded by Trump signs, tractors, and windy roads. We came across 2 trailers back to back that had a man's written manifesto painted on them about his faith in Trump. After reading the madness that we saw on the side of the trailer, we quickly found ourselves at Jacye's front door.
Pronouns are he, him. I mean, gender identity is male. It being 42, I feel like I kind of missed other gender identities weren't really around when I was coming up. So male, but I also kind of identify with the genderqueer and the non-binary that's around. I think my path maybe would have been a little bit different if I had started my transition 20 years after I did. Using language that is inclusive of all gender identities, I think, is critical. One of the things as an older person that I realize is my generation and the generations before me, it's far more likely that someone didn't have access to transition, and they may have lived their whole life in the closet as a trans person. And the longer you do that, the harder it gets, and the more likely someone could develop mental health symptoms from that. So I always advise people to never ever assume that somebody is cisgender or heterosexual, because certainly with the older generations, there's a very good chance that could be at the root of a lot of their mental health symptoms. So I was born in 1977, and I started to understand my gender identity in the early 2000s. So the representation, the conversation about transgender identity just didn't exist. I didn't have that language. I don't know if I would have self-identified earlier and known if that had been the case. I don't know. By the early 2000s, by the time I was working on this stuff, I had met a couple of trans guys. The internet was a thing that I was able to have access to, and that really gave me a language and framework. I had been really severely bullied and developed PTSD from it, and one of the ways in which I survived being bullied was I kind of stopped paying attention to my body. I just really dissociated from my body. And, finished up school, finished up college. Into my early 20s, I started getting into therapy kind of for a different reason. And I started talking a little bit about my school experiences, and the counselor was like, that's pretty big trauma, right? There were several experiences that I had where I had really big, what you would consider classic sort of flashback, body memory experiences. Working on that trauma, working on that PTSD brought me back into my body, which then I discovered was the wrong one. And I went through that therapy work, and I started to stand a little taller. And then I noticed this tendency to want to hunch in again. And I was like, what is this? What is still going on that I'm expecting all this weirdness? And I realized that it was my chest. Because then I was much more aware of having breast tissue And it took me a while to kind of make that connection. When I started to understand my identity as a trans person, she actually took it kind of negatively. She characterized it as an internalization of the messages that I had been told as a child about being a different kind of girl, or that I wasn't the right kind of girl, and thought that it was really more of a continuation of that traumatic experience, and that it was a sign of needing to do more work to be able to really understand myself and accept myself as female. And she also kind of personalized it a bit and made it about her, where she had talked about that, that if I transitioned, that she would grieve, and was trying to, I think, use herself as a reference to explain how other people maybe would grieve. And at that time I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if you're gonna be sad. Like, I need to do this. So when I sought therapy, I was already presenting as male. I had already come out to the majority of my friends. I already had a name. I walked into that appointment ready. And so the counselor that I worked with, most of the therapy was kind of just because it had to be done. She didn't do a lot of gatekeeping, anything like that. And part of the reason why I did the therapy also was because I was expecting to come out to my folks, and I was expecting that to go badly. I came out to them. They were like the last people I came out to that mattered. So my dad did okay. So I told them by writing a letter. I didn't trust myself to speak. So I wrote them a letter, and my mom finished reading the letter, and she said, "This is BS," and threw it on the table. And my dad did okay. He stumbled over name and pronouns and things like that, but he didn't have a negative reaction. My mom and I didn't talk for 10 months. Trying to find someone who would actually prescribe the hormones, there was a lot of rejection there. I flat out had one doctor who said he just morally couldn't agree with that. And there was one gynecologist in Fishersville, which is 2 hours away from Roanoke, who was rumored to do it. And so, imagine, being in your early 20s, not a very reliable vehicle, trying to make it up to some rando gynecologist, 2 hours away. That was very difficult. I was starting HRT. Oh no, that was all underground. That was the doctor in Fishersville, and some guy in the community shared his tea with me and gave me my very first shot, just to be like, this is what it's like have that experience of knowing that it's in your body. I can't do it anymore, but I'll do this. And then, so I was on testosterone again in my early 20s, and I was on a lowish sort of dose, and I wasn't on it for very long, maybe 6 months. And I stopped mostly because of family pressure, but I was on it long enough for my voice to drop just enough where I wasn't outing myself every time I spoke. After my wife and I started dating and then got more serious, she was really the impetus for me starting again. So the first time, the doctor in Fishersville, who's, if I remembered her name, I would say it, but I don't. I think she was already prescribing it to some trans guys, and the assumption was that we were going in there already educated, like we knew more than her. And then the second time that I went on it, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, again, this was through the grapevine. There was a trans woman that I knew who is already established with this doctor, and so when she began her transition, that doctor worked with her. And she told me about him, and she said, he might work with you, especially if you say you know me. So I went in, and he said, you obviously know a lot about this. I'm willing to prescribe it. I don't know too much. So I gave him resources. I went online and found I forget the name of it. There was a document for a long time, and it may still exist, a PDF of not the standards of care, which is all of the protocol for treating trans folks, but it was a much smaller document just about the effects of HRT. And I found that and I printed it off and I gave it to him. So the doctors, over time, doctors became more willing to take the chance, but it was always under the assumption that I was going in there educated, knowing what I was doing, and that they kind of vetted me and trusted that, nothing was going to go wrong. When you're young and someone has to fight with the insurance company, it's going to be your parents or whoever it is, whatever adult you can rely on. So part of it's just adulthood, but the other part is becoming much more secure in my rights, and understanding that when it comes to my healthcare, I'm not asking for permission to transition or to have healthcare, or I'm not asking somebody to make an exception, or I'm not asking someone to do something difficult. I'm just here because I need healthcare, and so you're going to do this because that's just what you're supposed to do. I don't go into situations anymore expecting them to agree that I need healthcare. I just need healthcare. So I started binding in my early 20s, and I had top surgery in 2013, so 10 years.
How did that affect you mentally when you were binding?
I've never thought about it. That's a really tough call, because which is more mentally taxing, binding or not binding? Without thinking about it more than I am just right now, I think something did happen where I became accustomed to something that really nobody should be accustomed to for 10 years. So when a person goes into a psychiatric inpatient unit, there is at a certain point where they basically have to be checked to make sure they don't have anything on them that's going to let them, harm themselves or to kill themselves. Okay. Virginia Baptist's process of that is I was given 2 hospital gowns, one for the front, one for the back, to sort of kind of drape over myself. And then I was instructed to take off my clothing and to hand it to them. So at no point is the person seeing your naked body, but they're able to check your clothing. So as a trans person, I do pack a prosthetic every day. And the way that I do this is my lovely wife modifies my underwear and creates a little pouch, so the packer slips into the underwear. So when I was told to take off my clothing and to hand it over, I said, do I have to take off my underwear also? And they said, yes. I said, oh. And they said, why? Is there something in your underwear? I went, yes, there is. So, yeah, I had to take off my underwear and my penis and hand it over to somebody else for them to inspect. Trans person, I pack so it's my penis. And these 2 security officers in uniform were large men. We're both we're not all about that. We just need to make sure that there's nothing there. I'm okay, here you go. As a trans person, that was really lousy. And I don't know how to make that better. Remember I told you about the guy that I saw for the top surgery letter? I wound up having a conversation with him one time about being in the hospital. And he said, if you ever have to go to the hospital, call me. Because he knew that, a trans person was going to need an advocate. And I didn't call him because years had passed between that conversation and my being hospitalized. But the time, in the condition I was in, which is a very powerless situation, I didn't have the wherewithal to advocate for myself for a modification to meet my needs. And so I just kind of had to go with it. Now, that was in February. I was hospitalized again in September. And this was as a result of the Cymbalta. So, Cymbalta is one of the medications that carries the black box warning of increased risk of suicidality. And I went on that medication in July, I think. And now, mind you, I was already dealing with depression. I was already dealing with PTSD from the traumas that had led me to depression and the conversion disorder. And the Cymbalta, I became dangerously suicidal. The way that someone's assessed for suicidality is kind of on a 1 to 4 scale, and 4 is imminent. I described that I was at about a 3.8.
Over 41% of trans men and women are estimated to have attempted suicide, and that is a rate that's nearly 9 times higher than a cisgendered individual. This is serious. This is a phenomenon. There is a need and there's an outcry for support, for help. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? What are we doing about it intentionally? When we have individuals come into our psychiatric emergency rooms across the Appalachia, do we have the right support in place to specifically speak to, okay, yeah, it was a suicide attempt, but let's look at why it was a suicide attempt.
I know that it was Cymbalta because of how I felt. It was a completely rational decision on my part. And there was no, I wasn't emotional, it wasn't emotional distress, I wasn't sad. I just was of the mindset of, I deserve to be done. I deserve to be done. And finally, I admitted to my boss that something was very wrong and that I probably needed to be hospitalized again. And looking back on it now, I can realize where, yes, I had depression, yes, I had been suicidal before, yes, I had a lot of stuff going on, I had plenty of reason to be suicidal, but that specifically, I'm sure I was having a black box reaction. And that's why it's there. Because it was unlike any experience I've ever had. And I've had other depressions. I've felt suicidal at times. They were usually very situational, and this was just a very flat, emotionless, I just deserve to be done. And Lewis Gale's process is different. Their process was, I did not have to be fully nude. I stayed in my underwear, and it was just kind of like a visual inspection. It was an intake person, so it was a woman in the room, and she just kind of like looked. I think I raised my arms, stuff like that. Oh, she did actually have me cough to make sure I wasn't hiding anything up my bum. And also degrading, but as a trans person who had had top surgery, it was okay. Now, if I hadn't had top surgery, if I was binding, I don't know if they would have expected the binder to come off. I'm not, educated enough about what a trans woman needs, underneath their clothes, and if they would have required to do something to reveal their body, that would have been really traumatizing. But that was my experience.
So what gives you peace overall?
You can probably hear her right now. My daughter, that little girl, she's everything. And she is sunshine. She is amazing. My wife, we've been together 10 years, married for 5. With everything that I've gone through, I have developed a sense of a higher power, and I just feel like with something I've gone through, there's probably things worse that could happen to me, but I don't think that anything's going to take me down, honestly. If I've already been through this much, and come very close to ending my own life, I'm not afraid of anything.
We left Jacye's home with a sense of hope. We may struggle and get knocked down, but we will get back up. We are survivors. Dr. Rosenthal invited us to attend the community's TDOR event that evening to remember and mourn the lives lost this year due to violence and hate crimes against trans individuals.
Of the 370 trans folks that have perished worldwide, and anybody who wants to at any time can come up and read from the list.
Andrade, 35, Peru, suffocated and stabbed. Estrella, 42, Mexico, stabbed. Elisangela, Brazil, shot. G. Salsa Rodriguez, 23, Brazil, beaten. Flavia C., 44, Brazil, shot.
Flavia Santana, Brazil, possible suicide. Perla, Brazil, shot. Levi Mate,
Mexico, shot. Kathleen Mendoca da Silva, 31, Brazil, stabbed. Roberta Wilmot Morales,